Hello friend. You find me pretty much halfway through this reduction linocut printing process, and I'm just taking a moment here to assess the next steps. I have a pretty good idea of what I want the finished print to look like, but for this murky sort of area at the bottom of the pond that my toads are gloriously wallowing in, I just want to make sure that I'm definitely going to be carving away the right areas. This is partly because the way that the light is bouncing around under the water with all that thick duckweed above, that's going to be quite challenging to portray. One of the beauties of linocut printing is that it's quite a flat medium, but that also means that when you want to show depth, working with that medium is quite a challenge. So I'm just ploughing on really at this point, because there comes a point in every project where you just have to get over your fear and get on with it. And this is the point where it feels like the point of no return, where I obliterate my insignia. There really is no turning back now. And I'm putting quite a lot of pressure onto my tools for this part, because I want to get rid of quite a lot of material so that we've got these very stark areas of high contrast. And I'm just speeding things up a little bit here, because there's quite a lot of ground to cover. I'm just going in quite gingerly with these dark murky areas, because as I say, it's quite a challenge with relief printing. You almost have to reverse your instincts. It's like you're drawing the light rather than the shadow, which if you're used to drawing like with either pencil or pens on paper, it's like you're working in a negative, so you have to rewire your brain. So yeah, I'm just taking my time with this part, and trusting my instincts as much as possible, really. So where I'm going right up to the background, which I cleared first of all before doing anything else in the previous video, I'm trying to carve out so that the interface, if you like, between the previous layer that we printed, the green sort of global colour, basically I want that interface to disappear as much as possible for the next round of printing, so we get a relatively smooth transition from one to the other. But here, as I'm starting to work into the details around any of those finer areas, those more fiddly bits, I'm just bringing my smallest V-gouge into play. It's about 1 mil diameter, and that's fine enough to refine details, but I know that I can still retain some of that definition in the final print. And at this point, I'm looking at my block and feeling a little distressed by how much material I have removed, and thinking, oh god, am I going to have any of that dark murky definition that I wanted here in the end? But yeah, nil desperandum. As I say, sometimes you just have to go for it, go with your gut, and trust that it will all work out in the end. Keep the faith. And that's one of the most rewarding things about any kind of analogue media, particularly these unforgiving art forms. As my old graphics teacher used to describe various media, there's forgiving media and there's unforgiving media. A forgiving medium is anything that can be undone or erased or painted over. But an unforgiving medium, once you've made a mark, that's it. If it's wrong, you just have to start again. I apologise, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat today. Appropriately enough. But yeah, sorry, I'm a little bit croaky, possibly, on the audio. But here I'm getting on with the pretty onerous task of defining the edges of all that slimy duckweed that my toads are wallowing in, and I apologise, we're all going to get some seasickness possibly with these sequences. I promise I won't labour on this part too much, but yeah, this just goes to show how much my block needs to move around whilst I'm working on an image like this, because I don't want to ruin my wrists and my various joints. I just find it's better to move the block as much as possible and then make small controlled movements with my hands. Just as I'm eager to get more definition into that duckweed, into the finished article. But I have a plan for how I'm going to do that with the very final layer, which will be the black line work. I can't carve every single tiny leaf of duckweed by hand, working like this. I'd be here for weeks, if not months, doing that, and ultimately I don't think it would lend much to the final thing. As if ever you see duckweed or any kind of pond scum, you don't really see the individual leaves. You just have this impression of this large, gloriously slimy morass sitting on the surface of the water. So I'm going to try and do justice to that with my methods in this piece. And it will certainly save my wrists an awful lot of strain. Just as I'm fretting about having maybe not left enough black in that dark murky area at the bottom of the image, I'm also hoping that I haven't overdone it with the black shadows at the top of the image where the reeds are. But yeah, this whole area is meant to be very high contrast and very murky. So again, I just have to try and trust my instincts and resist the urge to overwork this area, just as I had to resist the urge to underwork the part below. There are an awful lot of sort of fringes and edges of various reeds and leaves and other features that I really want to bring out and have a lovely stark edging too. Say one of the really pleasing things about linocut printing for me, particularly when working on a reduction print, and when you get to this sort of stage, is it moves from feeling like drawing to sculpting. It has this very three-dimensional quality to it, which is very satisfying, I have to say. But it's sculpting in reverse, sculpting a negative image, so as I say, it does require you to slightly rewire your brain for a few hours, which is quite a useful exercise. I think it's useful to see the world in a different way from time to time, isn't it? These dragonfly wings are probably the most delicate area of the design. I've already carved into them to an extent for the highlights, but this is the final pass now, really, and it's going to be a challenge to get that lovely thin, sort of filmy quality, that lovely translucency into these wings using printing. It's easy enough to do if you're using other media like graphite or watercolors would be great for this, but that sort of that lovely denseness from linocut printing, whilst great for so many things, makes this part a particular challenge. And now, finally, we come to the duckweed. I've been talking previously about how I had a plan for this in my head all along, and finally, here it is, and the proof of the pudding shall be in the eating thereof. So basically my plan, you can see here, is to go in with a soft sort of U-gouge and take out individual leaves of duckweed. I'm just getting some more definition into the lily pads as well as I'm going about this, and occasionally just going in and getting some more definition in those bits of duckweed that are clinging to the bodies of the toads in the middle of the scene as well. But my theory is, no, my hope, I should say, that by using the raised ridges around each individual mark that my tool makes, or the chatter, in other words, that should pick out each individual leaf of duckweed in the final thing. So basically every individual mark that I'm making with that U-gouge on the surface of the duckweed represents an individual leaf. But I have created some sort of flat areas where the duckweed is kind of clumped together, and you can see some tiny little windows through the weed into the water itself. Because if you look at anything that covers a large area, like duckweed or ground elder or anything like that, it's not just a homogeneous carpet. You'll have areas that are thicker, some that are thinner, and it's all part of individual clusters of plants, if you like. So I'm hoping that will come through in the final thing. But there is quite a lot of this stuff. It's a pretty thick carpet. And I'm trying to use the pressure of my tool here to create an undulation in the water as well. You can see that interface where we move through the water. It's not a perfectly still pond. There's a bit of weft to it as the water's moving. So I'm trying to convey that as well. But there's always time for some tool care, isn't there? And at the end of every sitting, when my wrists are getting tired and the light is fading, I always take a bit of time just to make sure my tools are going to be nicely honed for the next session. And this process can take about sort of 10-15 minutes depending on how I'm feeling and how hard I've been working, but it's worth doing. It's not a huge amount of time out of my day, and yeah, it's worth it to have nice sharp tools when I get back to work again the next day. Okay, back to business, and starting where I left off again, I'm just trying to use the depth of the marks that I'm making to give that impression that the duckweed is undulating with the surface of the water. So where we're looking more side on, those marks will be thinner, and where we're looking sort of more of a top-down angle, they should be broader. And it's nice to get some deeper marks into these other areas as well. Once we get to this point, the image starts to open up, and my wrists start to seize up, and you can see I frequently at this later stage in the process, I'm having to take more breaks and just stretch out my wrists a bit. This naughty little fellow who's just waiting in the wings, watching what's going on, is very delicate, and trying to clear out all the material around his eyes, and his teeny tiny little nosy is very delicate and very pleasing work. I've tried with the toad spawn to get a slightly translucent look to it. I don't want it to be all sort of starkly black and white, so I deliberately left some material in there on the previous pass, but now I really need to be diligent and get in there and make sure everything is gone and ready for us to start the next stage. But before we do, I just need to remove my prints, which I have had pressed underneath all these books, which will become familiar to anyone who watches my videos. I use the same books every time, and yes, I am the kind of person who has 2 editions of the same textbook, because whilst one has more up-to-date information, the other one has better quality images, which are still relevant and scientifically accurate. So that's my reasoning there. But yeah, I just have a go-to library of books that are great for pressing the prints in between printing sessions. So I think these have been pressed for maybe 3 days, 4 days, something like that. I'm just going to pause now so that we can enjoy a nice little bit of sensory entertainment. Oh yeah, so satisfying. I'm sorry, I promise I'll shut up now for the next few minutes. Okay, need to crack on a bit now because there's quite a lot of these to unpack. Incidentally, if anyone would much rather just watch 5-10 minutes unedited footage of me undressing my prints, please let me know in the comments. So now I just need to sort these prints in order of accuracy and quality. I'm basically grabbing them in bunches of maybe 4 or 5 at a time so that I can line them up and work out which ones are the least favourable, and they will go on the bottom of the pile, and progressively I will just grab the others in bunches, grabbing the least favourable for and then sorting those, and so on and so forth until I get to the top of the pile, and then theoretically I can work my way through, starting with the least, sort of like the lowest quality prints, the ones that have the more sort of striking registration issues, or maybe there's some slightly dodgy ink coverage that doesn't look that nice, that kind of thing. So now that I've got my ducks in a row, it's time to print this layer. And I'm a little apprehensive because I hadn't intended for this print to have quite so many layers to it. Initially it was supposed to be just green on a white background with black line work, but the more I've looked at it, the more I've wanted to add these slightly contrasting colours. And for the toads themselves, because the green for the duckweed and the reeds looks nice and murky, just the way I wanted it to, I really like those toads to have a slightly muddier sort of brown colour, slightly muted, not too high contrast, but just to slightly lift them away from that background. It could be a horrible mistake, I don't know. I'll just have to find out, but I'm trusting my gut on this. I would say you should always trust your gut, or at least I should always trust my gut, because the age-old aphorism is, either go with your head or your heart. But trouble is, my heart is a fantasist and my head is stupid. So my gut, however, never lies to me. It knows when it's hungry. I guess it may be dumb, but at least it's honest. That's probably the best I can say of it. I'm mixing up quite a lot of ink here, and I'm being very tentative with how much of the red I add, and I'm just siphoning off a little bit now just in case this next bit goes horribly wrong, because I quite like that sort of pale muted olive green that I have, but I think it could go further. Whilst I am very happy with how the emerald green has come out over most of the image, it is a little bit darker than I had envisaged, so I'm hoping that this last little touch will just lift those toads out and make them front and centre. I'm using a teeny tiny roller for this part because this is a bit risky at this stage. In an ideal world I would have done this layer earlier, maybe after doing the yellow I would have done the pale green, then the dark green, and then the line work. But I'm slightly feeling my way through this one. There's a plan, there was always a plan, but 'tis said no plan outlives contact with the enemy. So we're going with the flow here. And as before, I'm just applying my brayer, or rather it's an old roller that I have long since left behind me, but it still makes an excellent brayer. And Ooh, I'm quite happy with that. I know it's a bit stark, that contrast between the vibrant emerald and then the very muted kind of olive, but I like it. I'm into it. Phew, I'm so relieved. Right, now that I can sleep easy tonight, I can just crack on with the rest of these. So thank you again so much for taking time out to spend some time with me today. I hope you'll be able to join me for the final episode where we'll finish off the line work. Until then, take care. See you next time.